Roosevelt Park in Detroit's Corktown has undergone some major changes in the last few years. Of course, you know about Ford fixing up Michigan Central Station, but also a part of Verner was deleted and rerouted, beautiful paths added, old tree saved. Honestly, a listener put it best commenting on some pictures up on Instagram that it looks like a postcard now. How did that all come together? What are some of the thoughts behind the design? And what's something I learned that was in the historic plans back in the day that I never knew about? That's our show today on your Daily Detroit for Tuesday, August 8th, 2023. Joining us,
my name is Patrick Droze. I'm a project manager with OHM Advisors.
And
my name is Jon Kramer. I'm president of OHM Advisors.
Both heavily involved in this project and others around the city and region. I'm Jairus Days. Let's go to Roosevelt Park, where we recorded this conversation at a picnic table in the shadow of one of Detroit's most known icons. How did you come across being able to work on this project? Because this is something that has been a heart of this neighborhood for a long time, but really one that really didn't shine up as well as a lot of people, thought it could over the years.
That's a great question, Jer. And actually, as you mentioned, this park's been around for 100 years. And one of the things that OHM Advisors really tries to do, our mission is to advance communities. And this park is just a quintessential example of advancing communities. So this really fit with what we're trying to accomplish and how we saw that we could make the city of Detroit a better place.
And in terms of how we became involved with it, to John's point about advancing communities, this has been something that's been on the minds of Detroiters and of the neighborhood, Corktown, and really a lot of the surrounding neighborhoods for a number of years. And really kind of the start of this, in terms of formal planning, really started in 2018 with the Corktown Framework Plan. That really got the conversation started about what the community would like Roosevelt Park to look like. How we became involved actually was in 2021 when the city was leveraging ARPA dollars to really advance this park project. We started with really the work of just removing Verner Highway. So one of the things we talk about in design is if you don't know anything about Roosevelt Park, the one thing you notice right away is that there's 200 foot of roadway that's no longer here. And that was a design decision that was really started by the community. You could probably even go further back, but 2018 was really when it was written down on paper that that's when that roadway was going to come out. And OHM really took it from there, working with the city general services department, from the roadway removal, then into design, and then the construction just wrapped up a couple months ago.
As someone who lived less than a mile from this park for a long time, that roadway really defined it in some ways as a car space, because if you came up to see the old train station or anything else, you went there by car. There wasn't like that walkway or separation that you kind of see now as I'm looking around.
Yeah, and absolutely. One of the things that we're really proud of is, as Patrick mentioned, we met with the neighborhoods. We met with Southwest Detroit residents. We met with the people of Corktown. And I also want to mention that it was integral. We worked with the city of Detroit and Mayor Duggan. And one of the things we really focused on was not just making a beautiful space for the people and for the neighborhood, but something that was really unifying and was based on a shared vision. So we're super proud of that and appreciative of our relationship with the city of Detroit, the residents, and Ford Motor Company.
And from a design perspective, Jerry, as you mentioned, if you go back 100 years, of course, this was a transportation facility. It was the main hub of Michigan Central Railway. The tunnel is probably about a half mile from us. This is where the station logistically fell. And so as the station came online in 1913, there was a need to connect the station front door to Michigan Avenue, a couple hundred feet that way. At the time, as part of the plan, it was really designed to have this broad boulevard. It was part of the city beautiful movement at the time. Interesting, if you were to draw a line on where that boulevard started, it actually would go all the way up to basically the cultural center, to present-day Detroit Library, DIA, Historical Museum. That was actually a vision to actually convey that Verner Highway that used to bifurcate the park all the way up there. It was interesting to kind of look at the history about that, and it was really one of the drivers about how that roadway became to be part of it, and then the surrounding park. This was all neighborhoods before the station came online.
Yeah, I even looked at older photos and saw that there was even streetcar service that would loop through to out there. That was eliminated when the depository got built. But the idea of a boulevard that runs from here all the way to the cultural center is kind of crazy to me.
It was, and I think you have to kind of put yourself back in that time frame. So Detroit is, at that time, we're talking 1913 to 1920, going through meteoric rise. The auto companies are locating, building factories all across the city. There's exponential growth. And so the planners at the time were thinking big. And so something that we might today think is absolutely crazy of running a 200-foot boulevard from the front door of the train station to Woodward Avenue, it wasn't off the table. That was really what got that started. And then really the park was kind of the next part of that. Is there was an additional 10 acres that were needed to build this space to kind of transform that experience you had leaving the train station. It used to be basically back to working class neighborhoods that you might find throughout Corktown. They wanted that impression for people coming to Detroit for the first time to see something grand. And that was really, I think, how the community got behind that. And you know, in its, you kind of look at it historically, it was one of Detroit's first major urban renewal efforts, because you had this train station and the private sector was clamoring that they needed a better experience. And so it really kind of bought up a lot of the neighborhood and relocated some people. And there were some things that still really even to this day were unresolved that we were kind of able to address with the park design.
Interesting. What about the coordination that needs to happen between you all, Ford, the city? How'd that all come together? Because I feel like that's a pretty big task.
Absolutely. So one of the ways we brought together what we call a design charrette, where you're bringing those stakeholders there. You don't just do it once, you do several of them. And we did some of these, Patrick could talk a little bit about. I think we even did some right on site where we talked to the neighborhood.
Yeah, it mentioned that first project we got involved with was the closure of Werner Highway. August 28th, 2021 was the day that we closed Werner. So that was a Saturday morning, very hot day. The barricades went up Friday night. And that Saturday, we had an event for the community, and we sent out notifications to everybody within a mile of the park. And so we had all the community coming together and to talk about what did they want the park to look like. So those voices were important, as were the ones that were collected during the framework plan. And a lot of those really jived, I think, ultimately with what Ford's vision was. You know, they wanted open space, and they wanted obviously to be able to appreciate the station from all vantage points, and the community wanted that too, and we were able to, I think, deliver that.
One of the things too that I just really love about this project is you talked about the 100-year history, but Roosevelt Park really serves as a front porch to Michigan Central. And when you think of other Michigan gems, the Grand Hotel, the front porch, and whether you're sitting in Detroit on your front porch or whether you're out on an old country road somewhere in Michigan, sitting on that front porch and looking out at something really makes you feel part of the community, whether you're watching people or reading a book, and that's something that's very exciting to see with the project.
I'd also like to just really highlight the work of the General Services Department and Planning Development in really making sure that there were intentional conversations with not just the people that might show up at a public meeting to voice frustrations, but really seeking out opinions, working with Jeff Klein at the City of Detroit General Services Department, worked to produce engagement that really connected with people, whether it was online surveys, paper surveys, people coming to the park. And Jeff was really able to really help us make sure that those visions were coming through in what was going down on paper and ultimately getting built here. So I can't underscore enough how much Jeff really worked along with his team to make sure that we brought a design forth that certainly, met the needs of Ford, but also make sure the community had their voice recognized.
So how does all of this work compare and contrast to some of the other stuff that OHM and the two of you have worked on?
We've worked on a lot of projects and are working on some downtown. One of them that comes to mind is East Warren Cadieux project. We also did some work on Ryopel over there in Eastern Market. We also do some things that people don't ever see, like a sewer separation underground. But this one, to me, one of the things that I really like about it is just, I had the benefit of being here a half hour before you got here. There were people walking around. There were people snapping selfies. There were people looking at the gardens and the flowers. And it has that ability to be something for big events, whatever that may be. I could see people getting married here. I could see concerts here. But it also has that tranquil oasis of private, quiet nature, and I can see both of those.
And I think this is pretty common with a lot of Detroit projects these days, is there's an expectation, I think, among residents that we're okay talking about a plan, but we want to see some action. And so this project, if you look at it, again, we kind of mentioned getting started roughly in 2021. The park was underway really within 6 months of design being complete. To the point of what's happening across the city, we want to make sure that we have time for conversations, but we want to be realistic with the community about, we're going to hear your ideas, and our goal is to get those implemented. This project especially, I think, has really shown that. And you're seeing that too with a lot of the streetscapes like East Warren Cadieux, there's already work underway to upgrade that as well.
Yeah, I was just out there 2 weeks ago. It's absolutely insane seeing the amount of change between those areas. And the little note for listeners, I actually used to CB patrol out in that neighborhood. So like I remember it well. So to me, I hear what you're saying about timing, and I hear what my listeners say where they get frustrated, whether they're in the city or wherever they live, looking at something like, oh, there's a design, there's a rendering, and then like their children are in college by the time the thing happens. What are some of the keys to making a design or something like this happen in a more reasonable time frame?
I think one thing, obviously most important is getting that feedback and that input from the community, from the local businesses, from the store owners. You have to have that before you can go full speed ahead. Obviously, one thing that's very important is funding. So if you're going to get a contractor on board, you have to make sure that you have a solid funding source, and you may have to look at several solid funding sources in order to do it. But it's really that commitment, and that's back to that leadership from the city. If they are committed and want to make that project done, they're going to listen to their residents and they're going to move on this. And I think we saw that here in full force.
The other thing is, it never hurts to have a deadline you're working against. Really, we wanted to make sure that this park was delivered in time for when the station opens. And it's getting very close. We met the goal of making sure that was done. Everyone had a common vision. As we mentioned with the framework plan and then the community engagements that were done, there was pretty good alignment with what was going to happen. We used that as confidence to move forward with design and construction. And then it never hurts to have something like the American Rescue Plan Act, where there's a significant infusion of financial support to make projects like this that may have been borderline before, all of a sudden they can happen. And because Detroit has done the planning and had the ideas in the hopper, it made it a little easier to get it moving once it was time to actually get it built.
And that's something that I've noticed too over the years, that if something sits for a long time, in my head I go, do you have the money for that, right? Because once money gets spent by an investor, by a municipality, whatever, they have a very vested interest in getting it going. I do want to talk about the layout of this park a bit. We are, so I can kind of paint a picture for listeners, I'm looking out onto Michigan Avenue. To my left is, and my guest right, is kind of Cork and Gable and 2 James. Then over to the right is, Mercury Burger Bar and a building and some other things. I want to kind of work from left to right about design features and things in this park that are interesting to me. I think the first thing I notice, there are a lot of benches here, and to me, they're friendly benches. They're benches that don't feel aggressive to me. What was your thought on that? And that's throughout the park.
So obviously, I think we wanted to make this have the look and feel of a city park. A lot of the elements that you find throughout the city, be it benches, trash cans, grills, picnic tables, etc., those are found throughout the park. Some of the cool thing about the table we're sitting at here, and even all the benches, those are done, designed and built by Diseños in Southwest Detroit. So we work with them during design to talk about it. They've done some benches already. So we developed that design, and these are built to last, I would say. So you definitely will see these benches throughout. There's also the lighting throughout the park that you'll find, and it's consistent with the surrounding streets. Public Lighting Authority was brought in, and you come here at night, it has a really special feel to it with the station lit up and then the lights in the park. You just see people strolling and appreciating the architecture. Some of the other elements I think we could talk about is the pathways. You'll notice there's kind of some circuitous routing of them. One of the things we did in design, and our design team really focused on, was we did want to keep some of the historic elements of the park, some tributes to that. So one of the things we talked about at the beginning was, you had the 200-foot wide boulevard. And just for context, where we're sitting here, Jerry, if you kind of see the trees over here and trees over there, that's where Werner used to be. You see how big of a space that is. It's over 200 feet wide. We still wanted to have that centering moment within the park. So there's a 28-foot promenade that runs between the front door of Michigan Central Station and the intersection of 14th Street in Michigan. But then around that is kind of these radiating circular pathways that were really kind of part of that original design from, kind of call it the 1918 time frame. So that's part of it. It also has a variety of gardens throughout that really, as time will go on, these are just going to fill in more and more. So there's tremendous pops of color that you're going to find, and those are going to change as the season goes. The perennials will kind of fire in different ways, like almost fireworks out the summer. And then we wanted to preserve as many of the existing trees as we could. One of the main things that we heard on that super hot day, August 28th, was, man, we need some shade in this park. So we don't have necessarily shade structures, but we kept as many of the large trees as we could. Those were protected not only during design, but during construction. We made a lot of efforts to make sure contractors weren't driving on the roots and things like that. And then, probably the last thing to highlight, of course, is really just the view sheds. You'll walk around the park and you'll find interesting views where you'll kind of frame up the front door of Michigan Central Station or the CPA building on the corner. And there's even spots too, as you go closer to the station, you'll see the skyline in the distance. The other cool thing, and you probably are starting to see it around town, is, man, those towers at Gordie Howe Bridge are getting tall, and you can see them from this park. You can see them so many other places throughout the city. It's really cool to see that and see the Ambassador Bridge in the background. It's just really cool, especially at night, I think, to kind of walk around and kind of appreciate the architecture and neighborhood.
Jared, one thing, you were talking about some of the benches, and what I see is they're classy, they're comfortable, they're welcoming. And that's one of the big differences when I think of how infrastructure was designed 50 to 100 years ago. As was mentioned, it was all about moving cars from one place to the other. What you're seeing in today's design is a focus on the people. And that's something that our company, when we're designing things today, we realize, yes, it's important to give people clean water, take care of their sanitary sewer waste, design the road so it moves cars, but it's also about the people that are the end users of all that infrastructure. And I think you're seeing that with some of the gardens and some of the benches and the picnic tables, and my favorite, the swinging benches over there behind us.
In my head, I was like, we need to talk about the swinging benches because I absolutely love them. I think they're a very great touch. Every time I've been here, I'm like, I have to get on there, and it's absolutely great. One thing I noticed as a big change is the original, I don't know if it was original park, but the park design knew it was very angular. And although Michigan Central is on an angle, this is very organic. This is very curvy. And also part of that organic nature are the plants. Do you know anything about the selection behind what went with the plants? I see a mix of grasses. I see a mix of flowers. What were your thoughts with the plants?
On the planting plan, I really have to give credit to General Services Department, and Barry Burton at GSD really led the planting design. And really just a wide variety, lots of hydrangeas and kind of the plants you might typically see with the grasses, as you mentioned. The trees around the park, it's encircled by Yoshino cherries that go around the perimeter. So in the spring, you're going to have, much like you might have in Washington, D.C., there's going to be a moment when they bloom, and it's just going to bring this instant beauty coming out of winter and spring. But yeah, the planting gardens throughout the park have some consistency, wide variety of flowers. And then we also have rain gardens stationed around the perimeter of the site to manage the stormwater. So those will grow, and those are more of a kind of a monoculture of single plant selections. Buttonbush is the typical plant that's used in there. One of the things on the original park design was it was very centric to the train station. It was, it was about moving people in and out. That's what Verner Highway was to this park. And it was really centric to the train station. The reason for a lot of the curvy pathways throughout the park is really kind of providing connections to Corktown, providing connections to Southwest Detroit, and just, the various uses around the park. It's not so much about just bringing people to the front door. It's really kind of circulating and providing that experience for the neighborhoods surrounding it.
Point of technical order, is this Ford space? Is this city space? Is this a combination? How does that work? Do you happen to know?
So this is a city park. Absolutely. It's obviously Ford is part of the city, so they can use the space. And I think anybody can, really starting next year. The city, like any park, will allow for permit applications if somebody wants to use the park space for something. It is set up from an infrastructure basis with hookups for if you want to have a concert and need power. And there's water. Obviously, we talked about the grills and things like that. It is a city park, though.
The important thing, back to the design charrettes and the feedback that we got, Ford is investing, I think it's upwards of $750 million in Michigan Central. And so obviously making that park, back to that front porch idea, it needs to be something that works for the community, the city's visions and goals, as well as what Ford's doing with their technology mobility center there.
Well, it's a stunning transformation. I remember being on my old front stoop a few years ago, and just the first time I saw the train station light up in years or whatever, it's just been an icon. How does it feel personally for the both of you? This building, this park, I don't know how many stock photos over the years, right? Everything, all the ruin porn stuff, national stuff, it always undeniably started with Michigan Central Station. And to many people, this is the visual icon of Detroit's Renaissance is actually a thing, and we're making progress. How does it feel for both of you?
I'll start out by when I was in elementary school, and I grew up in the Ann Arbor area, but I vividly remember for a school trip, catching the train in Ann Arbor, getting off right here at the station in the mid-'80s. We spent the night in a church with our 5th grade class. We went to a Tiger game, and that was so cool. And then it closed down 3 or 5 years after that. So to kind of come full circle 40 years later, to see the Renaissance, to see it getting rebuilt and invested in, and to really be able to build this park. This park isn't our largest design, and it isn't our most complex design, but the effect that it has on the community and people, to me, is just amazing. I love it.
I feel like you and I might be the exact same age. As my dad would go ahead and we'd grab the train and go to Ann Arbor because we lived in the city. So we would go to Ann Arbor for like a weekend or whatever as like a family trip. And I remember my dad being like, we have to go through this because he never believed, rest his soul, that this would ever come back. Back in the 80s, he's like, you know what? Things don't come back in this town. And that stuck with me for decades. And now to like see this, it's definitely a feeling.
I'm going to pick up on that. So many with the younger generations, really just look at Detroit with optimism, that we can shed that old stereotype about what the city was and what it can't do. And so I know everyone on our project team, the level of excitement when you get a project like this, you just can't put your finger on it. To me, I'm still getting chills just thinking about it. If we could have, as designers, do one thing to kind of put to bed one of those stereotypes and get people looking at Detroit differently and realizing that Detroit can do this and Detroit deserves good things and does great things. It just brings tremendous energy to us as designers to see this through. And I think, this is something that to the day I die, it'll be just very special to me to be a part of it. We're very fortunate.
So what do you think? 313-789-3211 for your feedback or dailydetroit@gmail.com. Thanks to Cheyenne Noserini for editing this conversation. If you want to support work like this, buy us a coffee or a few. buymeacoffee.com/dailydetroit or send me an email, dailydetroit@gmail.com if you'd like to sponsor the show. With that, I'm J.R. Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.